Battle with the Moabites. They battled with the Jebusites. The Israelites battled with just about everybody. Let's face it, the Israelites like to go to war. In fact, the Israelites battle among themselves from time to time. On one occasion, there were six of the Benjamites that did a horrible act, and so all of Israel gathered together the men and battled against Benjamin. So those things happen all the time. The Israelites were really into battling. they liked to battle, and so it was easy for them to do that. So oftentimes it's easy for us to battle. Battling is something that we do from time to time, maybe too much. We all battle way too much. It's easy sometimes to blurt out some kind of insult, to blurt out, say something bad about somebody, rather than to hold your tongue. And worse possible is it harder to think good of that person who said something, did something to you. Now, that is really hard. But then Jesus comes along and is asked the question, what's the great commandment? And he says that you should love the Lord thy God with all the heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto that, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that young scribe has been pointed out by the speaker before me that actually had a scribe who agreed with Jesus. That was unusual. But that young scribe agreed with him. Yes, you say right, you say good, and that's well and good. But oftentimes I find that we often find no trouble saying right. The trouble is we don't do very much of it. The biggest problem I find with Christians and with Christianity in general is we don't do what used to say about we don't practice what we preach. The story of the Good Samaritan was a case in point. You had these two religious people who saw this man beaten up on the side of the road. Both of them had oftentimes preached and taught basic Jewish teaching is to take care of the stranger. Indeed, for even in modern day Orthodox Judaism, that they will provide a place setting. Set up some forks and spoons and set up a plate and a glass there for the stranger in their midst. And the reason for that is that they think that at some point in time that the person being the stranger might be Elijah. They're looking for Elijah to come back, and that's why on some occasions when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" the first thing that came to mind was, some think you're Elijah. They think you're the one who's come back from the dead to lead us to a better world. So the Jews in this day will set aside a place for the stranger. There's an interesting story that has parallel to that. There was once a king who had a child. I think it was a daughter, and for some reason or other, the daughter ended up spending time being given over to another family in the town. The trouble is nobody knew what that family was, and so people had to wonder whether that child was the princess, or whether that child was. And so what they did was they practiced great love to all the children in the neighborhood. And because they showed great love to all the children in the neighborhood, they likewise showed a lot of love to each other. In fact, that whole town got to be known as the Love Town because they were all careful to make sure that they showed great love to the royal one that might be in their midst. That's the power of love. Love can change individuals. That's what Jesus understood when he came out and did his teaching. All of his teaching had to do with showing love. That's why he said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do the things that I say? Who is my mother, father, brother, or sister, but he who does the will of the Father?" So again and again, he tells people that we ought to be doing the will of God. Surely Ruth did that. Ruth herself was a person that was that had been brought into that family, and then all, it seemed like all the men folk died. That there had not been any what they were waiting for. If Ruth had a child with her husband, then she would be obligated to stay with that family. If Oprah had a child with the husband, then she would be likewise required to stay there with the family. But neither of them never really could be called what used to be called a consummation of the marriage. They never had a child in this. So when they didn't have any more sons, Naomi didn't have any more boys they could marry, then he said, well, you can just go on home, be back with your daddy, back with your mama. But and Oprah said, okay, after a lot of tears and that sort of thing, Oprah went on back home. But Ruth said, don't ask me to do that. Where you go, I'll go. Your family will be my family. Your God, my God. So don't ask me to do that. And we know for a fact, and if you read further in Ruth, that she does go back. She marries Boaz, and that becomes part of the lineage of Jesus. So had Ruth not had that kind of love for the mother-in-law that made it possible for her, made it so she went back to the land of Naomi, Jesus would not have been born. Think about it. That was one of the requirements of within the lineage of David, that there be Ruth to make it all possible. Love can do many powerful things. Love can do great things all the time. And we're given these examples of types of love and expressions of love in the Psalm text. The Psalm text says how people, happy are those whose help is in God, Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord. Those who execute justice for the oppressed, who give food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoner free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord blesses those who bless others. I've often talked about the triangle of love, the love triangle. When we talk about love triangle, I know some of you watch them soap operas. Well, those soap operas often have love triangles. Usually got two people all in love with one particular person. That's a different kind of love triangle I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that the love triangle is when God loves us through his Son, we likewise should love others, and in doing that we show our love of God. That is the triangle of love. That's the way it ought to be. But too oftentimes we find ourselves not doing that. We get out on the road, someone cuts us off, we show them a bird. We holler all kinds of things at them. We might want to chase them down, and shake a fist at them. Some people have known to pull out guns and shoot each other just over a parking place. Recently there was a situation where someone killed somebody over a parking space. Rather than doing that, when someone cuts you off like that, you thank God that he didn't cause a wreck. It didn't hurt me. My car is still intact. I don't have any dents on my little car. I got my new little car, by the way. I bought a new little car, and I did some cleaning of it today. It was dirty. It was all that rain we had last week and got all mud all over the place. I just had to clean it. I'm sorry, Lord, it's on the Sabbath, but when you got a car, you got to take care of the thing. So I went out there and wiped it, and it's looking nice now. But that's one thing I would think about. If someone had cut me off my little car, I thank the Lord he missed me. That would be a good thing too. And I don't need to get even with the guy. But we all do that. We let our anger come forth. It's so easy to say something bad than it is to say something good. And that's exactly what we ought to live by. Try to find some way to say something good about somebody, even when we don't agree with them. President Trump and me, man, we're way different attitudes about how things ought to be. President Trump kind of likes a good fight. And he shakes his fist at people, he lies about people, he does all kinds of things. But even if I'm saying this about him, shouldn't I be trying to think of good things he's done? Sometimes it's hard to do. But I kind of agree with him when he talked about, for instance, the other countries, especially little small countries out there. For many of those smaller countries like Hungary, they're part of NATO. For them, NATO's troops, it is their military. They might have what we call a National Guard that take care of helping do things like taking care of flood victims and stuff like that. But they may not have any need for any major Air Force or Army or Marines because they got NATO. That's one of the things that President Trump was talking about, and I agree with them about that. Every country is expected to spend a certain percentage of their gross national product on their military, their own military, so they can contribute to the forces that are found up in NATO. NATO should not be all American, English, and French troops. It shouldn't be just the countries of the big countries that do all the actual fighting. Everyone is supposed to be putting their troops into the NATO forces. I agree with President Trump about that. But about other things, I have other problems. But I think that I have to give him the benefit of the doubt if I'm truly to be a lover instead of a hater. Sometimes it's hard to do that with some people, you know, that they're doing bad things to you. But that's what Jesus told us to do. Love those who hurt you, that despitefully use you. Pray for those who hurt you. Yeah. Jesus talked, if thy brother smite thee in your right cheek, turn ye the other. If a person asks you to go a mile, you go 2 miles. If a person asks you to give up your coat, you give him a cloak as well. Remember last week we had the story of Bartimaeus who dropped his entire cloak and went off to Jesus to the possibility of being healed. He gave all that really mattered to him within that life, that gave him some semblance of what it was to be a member of society. He just lost it all. Well, oftentimes we're not so willing to give of ourselves. We got to protect number one. We like to think of ourselves as the president has said, I'm a self-made man. We like to think of ourselves as self-made, but actually I'm not self-made. I've had to do a lot of hard work. I've had to do a lot of things. But if my mama had not set up a little bit of a retirement account for me as a part of her retirement account, I wouldn't be able to get by it hardly at all. My Social Security is pitiful. They told me I got just bare minimum of what you can get for Social Security. I thought for years I used to not pay any income tax at all because I didn't earn anything. I didn't earn enough to pay income tax. But the law is if you even make $300, just $300 a year, you have to pay Social Security. And so for a while I was always making maybe $3,000 or $4,000, and I'd pay Social Security on that. That's all of it. 15.6% something like that of my income got sent to them. So I thought I was doing a good job by always giving money, no matter how little I made. But now they tell me I don't make enough to hardly get Social Security. Just barely enough. Just barely enough. But my mother took care of that. And my mother was a lover too, in a way. One thing about my mother, she didn't hug me. She wasn't a hugger. She didn't show her love that way. My mother was a lover through care. I remember one hug. From my mother. I was an adult. I was serving up in Indiana as a church planter. And while I was up there, I had the opportunity to come down to Aiken, South Carolina, and to be a part of a mission symposium. And I was going to bring down my slides, and I'd show them all the mission work I was doing up in Indiana. And I remember I had a slide of my biscuits. I was proud of my biscuits, so I showed them how my great biscuits. They really look good up there. I haven't been able to make good biscuits since. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the water up there in Indiana. I don't know what it is, but I haven't been able to make those biscuits ever again. But I was proud of those biscuits. And while I was there, I had an opportunity to go by and see my mother in Columbia. I drove up there, and those days I had one of my aunts staying with her while I was up there in Indiana. And when I opened up the door, I remember my mother came up to me and gave me a great big hug. I didn't know what to think. What's wrong with this woman? She never gives hugs. It's not her way. In fact, when we used to go to church, the church used to they would have an opening. They would have an opening at the beginning, and then there was a time where they'd break up and they'd go do shaking of hands and patting on people on the back and hugging and that sort of thing. My mother thought that was the worst thing. That's not to be done in church. She did not allow that at all. That was just totally unsacrilege. That was sacrilegious. I couldn't believe you do that. So she was really against hugging. And yet she gave me a bodacious hug like crazy, squeezed the stuffings out of me after I'd been gone for 6 months. And that's probably why. But my mother showed her love by what she did for you. Caring. She was a true mother in that sense. As Naomi showed her love, her true love of her mother-in-law, not willing to desert her at all, but go back and be willing to say, your family, my family, your God, my God. And she was one of those who practiced what the psalmist said, who gave of herself, my mother was. And so in Mark's gospel, we find Jesus talking that no greater what Jesus says in Matthew, I believe, no greater love hath that he give up his life for a friend. And our Lord Jesus did just that. He gave up his life for each of us as his friends. He showed this great love by his willingness to die on the cross. When he was before Pilate, Pilate asked him. Pilate had the power to let him go, let him be free. All Jesus had to do was defend himself. If Jesus had just simply said, don't worry about anything. My people are not armed. We don't have any swords. Peter, on one occasion, when they were getting ready to haul him away, took out a sword and cut off someone's ear, and Peter was rebuked by God, rebuked by Jesus for doing this. And he healed the man's ear after doing that. If Jesus had pointed out that story, instead of having Pilate believe that he had a man with swords, he could have done it. He could have defended himself, but he didn't defend himself. He allowed himself to be crucified, to die the death of a criminal, to become the lowest of the low. And he did this for each of us. No greater love, he said, than a person give up his life for a friend. Jesus lived that. Even as he was telling other people to go the extra mile, to give more than is expected, he gave the ultimate more than was expected. He showed great love. And we ought also willing to do it as well. Now again, sometimes love is hard to do. We all have our difficulties in doing that. We have politicians we disagree with. We have individuals we work with all the time, people we have fights with. And we shouldn't have fights, but we do it anyway. But Jesus wants us to go beyond that. He's always calling for us to go the extra mile. He wants us to be like a lamp that's on a hill, that's there for all to see. Instead, we do what he said in the first part of that same text. We take our lamp and put it under a bushel. We hide it sometimes. We're guilty of that. We don't show forth to others that we do believe in Jesus Christ. And we show this oftentimes by the way we act. There was a song I was going to sing, and I didn't do it. Maybe I should have. Entitled, "They Will Know Us by Our Deeds." Indeed, it talks about how that in the first part of the verse, it talks about how that if we do the same thing that everybody else is doing, how they're going to know that we're Christians. Indeed, they will know us by our works, by what we do. When James talks about faith without works is dead, he was literally talking about the kind of good works that we're expected to do as Christians, as followers of Jesus. That's why people get the bad idea about churches. Oh, a bunch of hypocrites. Oh, I don't want to go to that place. In fact, of course, the church is exactly where the hypocrites ought to go. We ought to go there more often. Because hypocrites, the liars, that we are ourselves, we are sinners, we ought to be going into church. And church is a great place to be. A place of fellowship, a place of gaining understanding. And I invite each of you, wherever you are in your land, your place, to find a place to worship, to go worship. Doesn't have to be ecumenical, doesn't have to be Baptist, doesn't have to be Methodist. It can be any church you can find. And any church will be glad to have you. Just go down and have a seat, and they're glad to see you there. But first, you have to take that step. Take that first step. You could do it now, wherever you are. You could bow your head and take that first step in your heart to walk toward Jesus. Just a closer walk is what we sang. Just a closer walk with thee. You may need to walk with thee. Let us pray. I did.